Representative Omar, before this committee votes on your recommendations for increased aid to Somalia, I believe the members should be aware of the $340,000 you personally wired to Mogadishu over the last 4 years, and specifically, who received those funds. Vice President J.D. Vance's voice sliced through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room like a sharpened blade. Every head turned immediately, and the cameras from C-SPAN and the news networks all swiveled from Ilhan Omar at the witness table to the door where Vance had just made his entrance. This was entirely abnormal, as vice presidents did not typically attend committee hearings, particularly those to which they had not been invited. Yet there he stood, walking down the center aisle with FBI Director Christopher Wray and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent flanking him like prosecutors closing in on a defendant. Omar froze mid-sentence. She had been 30 minutes into her testimony regarding the humanitarian crisis in Somalia, discussing the need for more American aid and the moral obligation to assist refugees. The Democratic members of the committee had been nodding with sympathy. The Republicans had appeared bored, but not necessarily hostile. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned until the Vice President of the United States walked in holding a folder stamped with classified markings. Committee Chairman Jim Risch looked just as confused as everyone else in the room. "Mr. Vice President, this is highly irregular, and we are in the middle of testimony." "I am aware, Senator," Vance said as he walked straight to the witness table where Omar sat and placed the folder down in front of her. "But Representative Omar is testifying about U.S. policy toward Somalia, about how much aid we should send, and about which organizations should receive American taxpayer money. I think before the committee makes any decisions based on her expert testimony, they should know about her personal financial connections to designated terrorist organizations in Somalia." The room erupted in noise, with reporters leaning forward and committee members speaking over one another. Omar's face had shifted from an expression of confidence to pale shock in a matter of seconds. Vance opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be bank records and wire transfer documents, all with Omar's name clearly visible. "There are 47 separate wire transfers," Vance said, his voice carrying over the chaos, "between January 2020 and October 2024, totaling $340,000. All were sent through money transfer services to a single recipient in Mogadishu, Ahmed Noor Saeed, your brother-in-law." He placed the documents on the table where the cameras could clearly capture Omar's signature, her bank account numbers, the amounts, and the dates. "Ahmed Noor Saeed operates a business called Baccarat Trading Company, which the Treasury Department designated as a terrorism financing entity in 2023. Ahmed himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list. The money you sent him, that $340,000, we have traced through Hawala networks to al-Shabaab operatives, the very terrorists you claim you fled from as a child." Omar tried to speak, but no sound escaped her lips. She looked at the documents as if they were poisonous. Those were her bank records, her transactions, and her money going to the brother-in-law she had never mentioned in any financial disclosure. Chairman Risch found his voice and asked, "Mr. Vice President, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence?" "I have 18 months of FBI investigation," Vance replied. Wray stepped forward, opening his own folder to reveal wire transfer records, NSA intercepts of Ahmed Noor Saeed coordinating with al-Shabaab commanders, and Treasury Department tracing showing Representative Omar's funds financing terrorist operations. "This is not an allegation. This is a documented fact," Wray stated. The ranking Democrat, Senator Ben Cardin, looked stricken. "Representative Omar, do you want to respond to these accusations?" Omar's mouth opened and closed while her hands gripped the witness table. She had come here to advocate for Somalia and position herself as the moral voice for refugees. But now she sat facing evidence of terrorism financing spread before the world. Those wire transfers were to family, and I was helping family members with finances, Omar stammered. You were financing al-Shabaab operations, Vance interrupted. Director Ray, show the committee where the money went. Ray displayed a chart illustrating the flow of money from Omar's account to the transfer service, then to Ahmed Nur Said, and finally to a network of individuals. Those individuals are flagged as al-Shabaab financiers and operatives, Ray explained. We have traced $34,000 directly to individuals involved in terrorist attacks, Ray said matter-of-factly. This includes the Mogadishu hotel bombing in 2022 and the attack on African Union peacekeepers in 2023. Both operations used money that originated from Representative Omar's wire transfers. Omar stood up abruptly and shouted, "This is Islamophobia. This is targeting me because I am Muslim and I speak out." "This is evidence," Vance said calmly, "and bank records do not have religious bias." "Wire transfers are not Islamophobic," Vance continued. "You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier, which is a federal crime. You did this while serving in Congress, while having access to classified briefings about al-Shabaab, and while voting on foreign policy that affected Somalia." He pulled out her voting records to show she voted against designating al-Shabaab as a terrorist organization and opposed sanctions. Every vote you cast on Somalia benefited your family's interests, meaning you were not representing Minnesota. You were representing Mogadishu. The Democratic committee members looked as though they wished to be anywhere else. The Republicans looked energized, as if Christmas had arrived early. The cameras captured every second of Omar's face cycling through emotions of defiance, panic, anger, and fear. "I want my attorney," Omar said, her voice shaking. "You will need one," Vance agreed, "because the FBI has more than just terrorism financing to discuss with you." "Director Ray, tell the committee about the marriage fraud," Vance commanded. Just like that, Ilhan Omar realized this was not merely about money. This was about everything. Every lie, every fraud, and every betrayal was about to be exposed on live television. 4 hours earlier, Ilhan Omar had been in her congressional office reviewing her testimony with her staff, feeling good and confident. This was supposed to be her moment. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee had invited her to testify as an expert witness on U.S. policy toward Somalia and East Africa, given her background. "This is perfect," her chief of staff had said while reviewing the testimony. "You position yourself as the moral voice on refugee issues and attack the administration's Africa policy as insufficient." She planned to call for more aid, more engagement, and more support for Somalia. Omar had nodded, reading through her prepared remarks, which were emotional and personal. She would talk about fleeing Somalia as a child, the refugee camp in Kenya, and the American dream that allowed a refugee to become a congresswoman. Then she would pivot to policy, arguing that America was not doing enough. She intended to say that the humanitarian crisis in Somalia required more aid and that cutting support was cruel. It was designed to play perfectly with her base. It would get her on every progressive news show and reinforce her brand as the bold voice standing up for immigrants. "The Republicans will probably attack you," her communications director had noted. "They always do, but you are good at turning it into them being anti-immigrant." "Let them attack," Omar had said with confidence. "I am testifying about saving lives, and if they want to attack that, they can explain to voters why they hate refugees." What Omar did not know, and could not have imagined, was that, at that exact moment, in a secure facility in Virginia, Vice President J.D. Vance was reviewing the final version of an 18-month FBI investigation that would destroy her. The investigation had started in June 2023, when the Treasury Department flagged unusual wire transfer patterns from Omar's personal bank account. There were 47 transfers to Somalia over 4 years, all structured just under the reporting threshold. It was a classic money laundering pattern that Treasury had referred to the FBI. The FBI had opened a counterterrorism investigation, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. Vance sat in the sensitive compartmented information facility with his investigation team, including the FBI director and Treasury secretary. They all held top-secret clearances and possessed evidence that would end a congressional career. "Walk me through it one more time," Vance said. "I want to make sure we have her dead to rights before I walk into that hearing." Ray opened the primary evidence binder, which detailed the history of Representative Ilhan Omar. Her public story was the American dream of a refugee becoming a congresswoman, but they had found systematic criminal activity spanning her entire time in office. He pulled out the financial records, starting with the money transfers. Between January 2020 and October 2024, Omar made 47 wire transfers from her personal Bank of America account to money transfer services. The total amount was $340,000, and all transfers were structured under $10,000 to avoid currency transaction reports. All the money went to one recipient, her brother-in-law, Ahmed Nur Said. Ahmed was based in Mogadishu, where he operated Bakara Trading Company, ostensibly an import-export business. Vance looked at surveillance photos of Ahmed meeting with known al-Shabaab operatives. "How do we know he is a terrorist financier?" Vance asked. "Multiple sources," Ray said, noting that Treasury designated the company as a financing entity in 2023. Ahmed himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list, and the NSA has intercepts of him coordinating with known commanders. He showed the translated intercepts of conversations between Ahmed and al-Shabaab financial facilitators discussing fund transfers and operational needs. "We traced Omar's money through the Hawala network," Treasury Secretary Besant added. Hawala is an informal money transfer system common in Somalia that is difficult to trace, but we had help from Somali government sources. The flowchart showed Omar sending money to the transfer service, which delivered it to Ahmed, who distributed it to 18 recipients confirmed as al-Shabaab members. "We can directly connect $34,000 from Omar's transfers to 2 specific terrorist attacks," Besant stated. The Mogadishu hotel bombing in March 2022 killed 17 people, and the attack on African Union peacekeepers in August 2023 killed 9, Besant explained. Vance absorbed the fact that she had funded terrorist attacks while serving in Congress. "It gets worse," Ray confirmed, because her congressional voting record shows she consistently voted in ways that benefited al-Shabaab. He pulled up voting records showing she voted no on designating al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization in July 2021. She was one of only 3 House members to vote that way. In October 2022, she voted no on imposing sanctions on entities financing terrorism in Somalia. In March 2023, she pushed amendments to increase aid to Somalia, specifically to organizations connected to her family. She was not just funding terrorism with personal money, the NSA director added. She was using her congressional position to advance policies that benefited terrorists and her family. The intelligence dimension revealed they had been monitoring her communications under a FISA warrant since April 2023. Her phone calls to Ahmed show her discussing U.S. policy towards Somalia and how to influence aid distribution, the director said. She is coordinating with him and using her position to help him. Vance looked at the overwhelming evidence, but knew she would claim Islamophobia if he exposed this publicly. "What about the marriage fraud?" he asked. The White House counsel pulled out the DNA evidence, confirming they finally had proof. When Omar was arrested for a traffic violation in August, Minnesota took a DNA sample per standard procedure. "We got a warrant to compare it to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi's DNA from when he applied for immigration status. The results show a 99.9% probability they are siblings, meaning when Omar married Elmi in 2009, she married her brother. That is immigration fraud done to get him U.S. residency status," Vance concluded as he read the definitive report. "This destroyed the defense she had used for years. And there is tax evasion," the Treasury added. "She received income from Somali sources that she never reported, approximately $250,000 over 5 years flowing back from her family. She also used campaign funds for personal expenses, paying her husband's consulting firm millions for no actual work." Vance sat back and took it all in. Terrorism financing, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and campaign finance violations. It was the most complete corruption case he had ever seen against a sitting member of Congress. "She is testifying at the Foreign Relations Committee today," Vance said, recommending the U.S. send more money to organizations connected to her family while she is actively funding terrorists there. He made his decision to go to the hearing and walk in with the evidence on live television to end her career that day. His team looked at each other and noted it was unprecedented for a vice president to ambush a witness. "I am not ambushing a witness," Vance said. "I am exposing a terrorist financier who happens to hold a congressional seat." At 2:00 p.m., the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing began with Chairman Risch giving the introduction. Omar took her seat at the witness table, adjusted her microphone, and looked at the cameras with practiced confidence. This was her element, speaking truth to power and advocating for the powerless. She thanked the committee for inviting her and began her testimony about the humanitarian crisis in Somalia. She described her experience as a child refugee, the trauma of fleeing violence, and the hope of coming to America. "But America is not doing enough for the people who are suffering now," she argued. She mentioned the drought displacing millions and the conflict with al-Shabaab destabilizing the region. She called for more funding and more engagement with Somali civil society, making it sound noble and moral. Democratic senators nodded along, and Senator Chris Murphy asked sympathetic questions. Omar was hitting her stride, and she believed that in 30 minutes she would be done. She planned to do a press conference attacking Republicans and appear on MSNBC that night. Then the doors at the back of the hearing room opened, and Vice President J.D. Vance walked in unannounced. He headed straight down the aisle toward the witness table with the FBI Director and Treasury Secretary. The room went silent. Senators stopped mid-question, and staffers froze. Cameras swiveled to capture this completely unprecedented moment. Omar watched him approach with confusion on her face, wondering why the vice president was there. Then she saw the classified folder in his hand and the expression on his face, feeling the first flutter of real fear. Vance reached the witness table and set his folder down in front of Omar with a solid thump. Chairman Risch tried to regain control, noting the unusual nature of the interruption. Vance responded respectfully but firmly that the committee needed to know about her financial connections to terrorism before voting. The room erupted as reporters scrambled for phones and committee members talked over each other. Omar's face cycled from confusion to anger to something close to panic. Senator Cardin asked if there was evidence to support the extraordinary accusation. Vance opened the folder and set the bank records on the table facing the cameras. He laid out the 47 wire transfers totaling $340,000 sent to her brother-in-law in Mogadishu. He placed each document deliberately, showing wire transfer confirmations and bank statements with Omar's name clearly visible. The amounts ranged from $3,000 to $9,000, always under the reporting threshold. The recipient was Ahmed Nur Saeed, who operates Bakara Trading Company, Vance said. He produced treasury documents showing the company was designated as a terrorism financing entity. We have traced the money through Hawala networks to al-Shabaab operatives. Omar tried to stand, but her legs would not work. Those were family transfers. I was helping family, she stammered. With financing terrorism, Vance said flatly. FBI Director Ray stepped forward with flowcharts showing the money movement from Omar's bank to the network in Mogadishu. He identified 18 recipients, 7 of whom were confirmed al-Shabaab members and 4 of whom were financial facilitators. He pulled up photographs of men in Mogadishu labeled with names and terrorism-related designations. We can directly trace $34,000 from Representative Omar's transfers to 2 specific terrorist attacks, Ray said. The committee room was deathly silent as every senator stared at the evidence. Senator Lindsey Graham spoke up, asking if she sent the money to a designated terrorism financier. Omar claimed she had no knowledge of what her family was doing with the money. You are on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and receive classified briefings about al-Shabaab, Vance interrupted. You knew or should have known exactly what your brother-in-law was doing. Senator Marco Rubio asked Vance to elaborate on her voting record. Vance read from the documents, highlighting her vote against designating al-Shabaab as a terrorist organization. Gasps came from the audience as he noted she was one of only 3 members to vote that way. He listed her opposition to sanctions and her push for increased aid to organizations tied to her family. Senator Ted Cruz was practically vibrating with anger as he summarized that she was funding terrorists with personal money while trying to send them taxpayer money. That appears to be the case, Vance confirmed. Omar finally found her voice loud and defensive, claiming this was Islamophobia and targeting of a Muslim woman. This is evidence, Vance cut through her volume. Bank records aren't Islamophobic, and wire transfers don't have religious bias, he stated. You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier, which is material support for terrorism under federal law. He showed the statute to the committee, explaining that providing money is a federal crime regardless of intent. You are guilty, he declared. Senator Chris Murphy looked pained, but asked Omar to explain the transfers. Omar looked at Murphy as if he had betrayed her, but he could not ignore the evidence on the table. I sent money to family members who were struggling, she insisted. You had extensive idea, Ray interrupted, citing NSA intercepts of her coordinating with Ahmed. He produced redacted transcripts of phone calls where she discussed sanctions and legislation. You were sharing classified information with a terrorism financier, Ray said. Omar shook her head, claiming the calls were about family business. You were using your congressional position to help terrorists, Vance said. Secretary Bessent then stepped forward to discuss the tax evasion. He identified $250,000 flowing back to her from Somali sources that appeared nowhere on her tax returns. That is tax evasion, he stated, noting the penalty of prison and fines. Senator Chuck Grassley asked about her campaign finances. Bessent confirmed her campaign paid her husband's consulting firm $2.8 million for no apparent work. The company appears to be a shell company created solely to funnel campaign money to her household, he explained. Vance then pulled out the DNA report regarding the immigration fraud. The allegations have existed for years, and let me show the committee why they were accurate, he said. He explained that the DNA sample collected during her traffic violation was compared to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi's DNA. The results show a 99.9% probability that Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Elmi are biological siblings, Vance announced. She married her brother, he said over the exploding noise of the room. She did it to help him obtain U.S. residency status, which is immigration fraud and marriage fraud. Senator Tom Cotton stood up, clarifying that a sitting member of Congress committed fraud to get a potential terrorist into the country. Correct, Vance confirmed, adding that her brother had connections to extremist groups. Omar shouted that it was a lie and fabricated evidence. It is a DNA test from a federal laboratory, Vance said calmly. Senator Cardin tried to ask if she could respond with counsel, but Vance insisted the evidence would not change. You came to America as a refugee, you became a citizen, and you used your position to fund the terrorists you claim to have fled from, Vance said. Omar's eyes were wet, though the cause was unclear. I dedicated my life to helping refugees, she said. You dedicated your life to enriching yourself and your family while using progressive politics as cover, Vance interrupted. You are a fraud who exploited your refugee story. Chairman Risch tried to adjourn, but Senator Cotton cut him off, demanding answers from the witness under oath. Representative Omar refused to answer questions about the money, the marriage, or the taxes. Senator Rubio moved to refer the matter to the Department of Justice and recommend expulsion. Senator Cotton seconded immediately. The Democrats knew the evidence was overwhelming, and that defending her meant defending a terrorism financier. Senator Murphy agreed the matter should be referred to the DOJ. Omar looked around wildly as her support evaporated. I want my attorney, she whispered. You will have plenty of time for attorneys, Vance said. Director Wray then read formally from a document stating that a federal grand jury had returned an indictment. There are FBI agents waiting outside this hearing room, and you are going to be arrested today. Omar's face went white as she argued they could not arrest a sitting member of Congress. We can arrest anyone who commits federal crimes, Wray said. The hearing room erupted as the reality of the arrest set in. Chairman Risch adjourned the hearing and dismissed the witness. Omar tried to leave, but her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. She reached the door and found 6 FBI agents waiting in the hallway. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, you are under arrest for material support for terrorism, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and related charges, the lead agent said. The handcuffs clicked onto her wrists, the sound echoing in the hallway. Omar shouted that this was political persecution as they walked her toward the elevator. This is 18 months of evidence, an agent said quietly. The elevator doors closed on Ilhan Omar in handcuffs, ending her career. Back in the hearing room, the committee voted unanimously to recommend her expulsion. Within an hour, the footage of the confrontation and arrest was everywhere. By evening, the House had scheduled an emergency expulsion vote. Even her closest allies in the squad distanced themselves from her. That night, Omar sat in federal detention in protective custody. Her lawyer sat across from her, reviewing the bad situation. They cannot prove I knew the money was going to terrorists, she argued. The jury will believe you knew, the lawyer said, citing the classified briefings. He told her the DNA test was solid and that her marriage to her brother was a provable fact. Honestly, take a plea, the lawyer advised. If you go to trial, you could get 25 years, but a plea might get you 10. 10 years is a gift, considering you funded attacks that killed Americans," he added. The next morning, the House voted 376 to 54 to expel her. She was gone after only 6 years. The criminal trial began in February 2025, and Omar pleaded not guilty. The prosecution presented the wire transfers, intercepts, DNA, and financial records. It took the jury 3 days to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge was harsh at sentencing, noting she had used her platform to fund the terrorists she claimed to flee. "I sentence you to 23 years in federal prison," the judge declared. "I am also recommending that your citizenship be revoked for fraud," the judge added. Omar broke down crying as she realized she would be deported after her sentence. In June 2025, a federal judge revoked her citizenship. Ilhan Omar was now a convicted terrorist financier serving 23 years and facing deportation. 6 months later, she sat in her cell at FCI Coleman, known only as inmate number 67854-018. Her first few months had been brutal, as other inmates attacked her for her terrorism links. She was moved to protective custody and spent 23 hours a day in her cell. Her family abandoned her, her husband divorced her, and her children changed their names. Her siblings denounced her, and the Somali community condemned her actions. Her district elected a Republican Somali-American woman who campaigned on not funding terrorism. Progressive Democrats ran away from any association with her. The squad disbanded entirely. In December 2026, her lawyer told her that Somalia had agreed to accept her for deportation. "You are lucky they are accepting you at all," the lawyer said. Omar sat back, realizing she would be sent to a country she did not know. "What will I do there?" she asked. "That is not my problem," her lawyer replied. The media coverage eventually dropped off, and she was forgotten. In Minneapolis, her former district moved on. 5 years into her sentence, she received a letter from her oldest child telling her not to write back. She didn't cry, as she was numb. A Vice article in year 7 went viral for a day before being forgotten. She was denied early release at year 10 and year 12 for showing no remorse. Finally, at year 15, she was granted release at age 57. ICE agents were waiting to take her into custody immediately. On a Tuesday morning in June 2040, she boarded a commercial flight to Mogadishu in handcuffs. The other passengers avoided eye contact with the deported terrorist. She landed in a hot, dusty city that was nothing like she remembered. Somali authorities met her coldly, telling her she was not welcome, but they had no choice. They released her with $50 and told her she was on her own. She stood in Mogadishu with nowhere to go and no one to call. Employers would not hire her, and the diaspora wanted nothing to do with her. 6 months later, she was living in a slum and surviving on odd jobs. A journalist tracked her down for an interview, but she still expressed no real remorse. After that, she faded into complete obscurity. In Washington, her name became a cautionary tale. In Minneapolis, the community erected a memorial to the aid workers killed by the bombing she funded. J.D. Vance commented that her story was not persecution, but justice. In Mogadishu, she lived in a one-room apartment, simply existing. She was 62 years old when she died of a heart attack in her apartment. Nobody found her for 3 days until the neighbors complained about the smell. There was no funeral, no memorial service, and no obituary in American papers. The Guardian ran 3 paragraphs stating that Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, the former U.S. Congresswoman convicted of terrorism, financing, and deported, had died in Mogadishu. That was the entirety of her legacy. She had paid for her choices with 15 years in prison, deportation, and a lonely death in the country she had betrayed America to help.